Across Europe, millions of people are making decisions that feel completely rational. And those decisions are quietly breaking something no one is talking about. Taken together, they change how economies behave without ever announcing it. There is no single law behind it, no sudden crisis, no dramatic turning point that shows up in the headlines. Instead, it begins with ordinary choices. A 32-year-old software engineer is staring at two screens. On one side, a new contract, a raise that technically counts as progress. But after taxes, mandatory contributions, and rising living costs, the difference is almost invisible. On the other, an email from a recruiter in the United States. The tone is polite. The expectations are clear. The numbers are concrete. Staying doesn't feel like failure. It feels like standing still. Leaving doesn't feel like ambition. It feels like math. And when enough people make that same calculation, something unusual happens. Countries don't collapse. They don't announce recessions. They don't trigger emergencies. They simply stop moving. Growth slows without stopping. Plans get delayed without being canceled. The future gets postponed without ever being denied. And the people who feel it first are rarely the ones who made mistakes. They are often the ones who followed the rules, studied the right things, worked at the right companies, and did everything they were told would lead to stability. No headlines, no crisis. Just a system quietly locking itself in place. This video is not about one person. It's about what happens when millions of reasonable decisions stack on top of each other and permanently change how an economy works. At his company, the same calculation is happening. Not in panic, not in fear, but in calm professional meetings. No one is talking about collapse. They are talking about exposure, expand or freeze, invest or move money out, commit or wait. Every month, costs inch higher. Not dramatically, not enough to justify alarm, but enough to make forecasts unreliable. Energy contracts are renegotiated. Service fees creep upward. Labor costs adjust quietly, one review cycle at a time. Every quarter, long-term plans get pushed back. Not canceled, just delayed until conditions feel clearer. Nothing is collapsing, but something is tightening. The room for error shrinks. The tolerance for experimentation narrows. The cost of being wrong quietly increases. Managers begin choosing predictability over possibility, not because they lack imagination, but because the environment punishes mistakes more than it rewards success. Hiring slows. Projects are phased instead of launched. Anything irreversible becomes harder to approve. Risk doesn't disappear. It gets scheduled, deferred, wrapped in conditions. And this isn't unique to one company, or one sector, or one country. Across the system, the same logic appears. When enough individuals make the same rational choice, the entire economy begins to shift. Quietly at first, almost invisibly. Not through headlines, not through protests, but through thousands of internal decisions that all point in the same direction. This is how systems change without anyone deciding to change them. This is the mechanism we're going to follow. Capital moves. Opportunity follows. Opportunity weakens. People adjust, and the burden concentrates. When capital pulls back, nothing breaks immediately. There is no shock, no sudden collapse, no dramatic failure. Expansion simply stops. A mid-sized manufacturing company finishes its quarterly report. Sales are steady. Orders are stable. Customers haven't disappeared. On paper, the business looks healthy. But when the CFO opens next year's plan, the question isn't, how much more can we sell? It's colder than that. Do we dare fund the next step? They review their options. The bank is still willing to lend, but it now demands more collateral, more guarantees, more certainty than before. A private fund is interested, but only if it gains control. What used to be growth capital now comes with conditions. The public capital market technically exists, but it isn't really open to companies like this. Not without scale, not without momentum, not without a story that promises acceleration. None of the doors are closed. They're just heavier than they used to be. So the decision comes quickly. Delay. No new production line. No expansion into new regions. No long-term supplier contracts. It sounds cautious. It sounds responsible. And in isolation it is. But here's the part that confuses people. The business didn't change. Its products didn't get worse. Its workers didn't become less capable. But growth did. Growth doesn't slow because the business is weak. The business becomes weak because money is no longer there to absorb risk. When capital pulls back, risk doesn't disappear. It gets redistributed, downward, onto the company, onto managers, onto individual decisions. At that point, even small mistakes become dangerous. So fewer decisions get made. And that's when stagnation begins to look like stability. And once growth slows quietly, the pressure has nowhere to go. As capital retreats, the risk doesn't vanish. It changes direction. At first, it lands on management. Decisions that used to feel routine now carry weight. Budgets are reviewed not once but repeatedly. Plans are approved only after layers of justification. Middle managers become the shock absorbers. They are asked to deliver the same results, with less margin, less flexibility, and less tolerance for error. A missed forecast no longer looks like noise. It looks like negligence. So decisions slow down, not because people hesitate, but because the cost of being wrong has moved closer. Then the risk slides further down. It reaches individual employees. Targets are still there. Deadlines remain, but the support structure thins. Teams are asked to stretch. Roles quietly expand. Responsibility grows without matching authority. People stop experimenting in small ways. They choose safer methods. They repeat what already works. They avoid anything that might fail visibly. At this level, the shift is almost invisible. No memo announces it, no policy explains it. But behavior changes. Risk is no longer something the company absorbs. It becomes something individuals carry. And when enough people feel that weight, the organization doesn't collapse. It tightens. Decisions narrow. Initiative fades. Momentum slows. This is how risk moves through a system, without ever appearing on a balance sheet. And once it reaches this level, reversing it becomes far harder than preventing it. Risk doesn't disappear when money pulls away. It moves downward, onto the company, onto managers, onto individual decisions. At that point, even small mistakes become dangerous. A hiring decision can't be reversed easily. An expansion misstep lingers for years. A wrong bet no longer looks like learning. It looks like liability, so fewer decisions get made. The company responds the only way it knows how. It shrinks ambition. Promotions slow. Budgets are marked under review. Projects are postponed until next quarter. Not because leadership lost vision, but because the cost of being wrong has quietly increased. Talented employees notice. They see that timelines stretch, that decisions take longer, that risk is discussed more than opportunity. They don't wait for decline. They don't wait for layoffs. They leave while their resume still looks strong. Now the company loses two things at the same time: money and people. The remaining team absorbs more work, roles stretch, caution deepens. Managers spend more time defending decisions than making new ones. Investors notice the shift in tone. Less ambition suggests lower future returns. Lower returns make capital less interested. So funding stays on the sidelines. A self-reinforcing loop forms. Less capital leads to less expansion. Less expansion leads to slower growth. Slower growth reinforces capital's caution. Each step makes the next one feel inevitable. And by the time this shows up on a chart, the decision is already irreversible. That's why these systems feel stable. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses, nothing triggers panic, but the path forward quietly narrows. And once that happens, the system isn't choosing stagnation, it's drifting into it. What makes this kind of slowdown difficult to stop is that the warning signs arrive late. Most systems don't react to decisions. They react to outcomes. Budgets respond after projects are delayed. Employment data moves after hiring freezes. Investment figures shift after capital has already pulled back. By the time the numbers change, the behavior that caused them is already locked in. For months, everything still looks stable. Revenue hasn't collapsed. Employment hasn't fallen sharply. Nothing on the dashboard flashes red. That's because the damage isn't visible yet. It lives in decisions that were never made. The expansion that stayed on the whiteboard. The role that was never approved. The risk that was quietly avoided. They don't show up as losses, and they show up as absence. And absence takes time to measure. When the data finally reflects the slowdown, the system interprets it as a new problem. But it isn't new, it's delayed. At that point, policymakers respond to what they can see, not to what has already passed. Companies react to the present even though the decisive choices were made quarters earlier. This is why interventions feel late, and why solutions hit symptoms, not causes. The system isn't failing to respond, it's responding on a lag. And once that lag is built into behavior, speed becomes very difficult to recover. Momentum doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades while no one is looking. When costs become unpredictable, planning breaks. And when planning breaks, growth breaks with it. A logistics company calls an emergency meeting, not because revenue is falling, not because customers are leaving, but because the cost sheet was updated. Energy prices are higher than expected. Insurance premiums have increased again. Compliance requirements have expanded quietly. Labor costs continue to rise, review after review. The warehouse lease is up for renewal. No single line is fatal, but together they change behavior. Budgets become defensive documents. Forecasts turn conservative. Margins are treated as fragile rather than expandable. The rational response is immediate. Cut expansion, hold position, avoid risk. At first, the effects are subtle. Operations stretch thinner. Deliveries slow slightly. Schedules lose flexibility. Large clients start asking careful questions, not because service has failed, but because it no longer feels resilient. Costs don't rise in one place. They rise everywhere at once. Energy affects transport. Transport affects delivery. Delivery affects contracts. Contracts affect cash flow. And when risk rises across the board, experimentation becomes expensive. Testing requires approvals. Approvals require justification. Justification requires certainty. So organizations stop asking, will this work? And start asking, what goes wrong if it doesn't? That single shift alters behavior. Safe options win by default. Bold ideas wait for a better moment. Learning slows down, not because people stop thinking, but because thinking without action carries risk. A system designed to avoid short-term pain quietly sacrifices long-term adaptability. And by the time that loss becomes visible, the habits that caused it are already locked in. Eventually, the effects become personal. A 30-year-old engineer looks at his paycheck, not to celebrate, to calculate taxes, mandatory contributions, surcharges, costs that didn't exist a few years ago, but now feel permanent. What remains isn't small, but the gap between effort and reward keeps widening. The hours are longer, the expectations are higher, but the sense of progress is thinner. Staying doesn't feel wrong. It doesn't feel like failure. It doesn't feel irresponsible. But leaving feels logical, not emotional, not dramatic, logical. On the business side, hiring becomes heavier. Each new employee is no longer just a salary. It's a long-term obligation, a legal commitment, a cost that can't easily be reversed. So companies delay hiring, or hire elsewhere, or redesign roles to avoid permanence. People with options adjust first. They don't announce it loudly. They don't frame it as protest. They simply move. And here's the paradox. The people who can leave most easily are often the people the system needs most. Skills and adaptability, languages, mobility. When they leave, the burden doesn't disappear. It concentrates. Eventually, this reaches the government level. Budgets tighten, spending locks in, flexibility disappears. No single decision looks wrong. Be cautious. Protect workers, avoid short-term pain. Each step makes sense on its own. But added together, the system slowly loses its ability to adapt. And when systems can adapt, capital becomes cautious again. The loop closes. So here's the uncomfortable question. If you had a stable job, a good life, and people you loved, but you could see the ceiling coming, would you stay or would you leave while you still could? Because systems optimized to avoid immediate pain can quietly lose the strength to absorb the next shock. And that tension doesn't announce itself. This is the intersection between today's policy choices and tomorrow's economic cycle.